Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us here on CBS News 24/7. I'm Lana Zak. It is a watershed moment in the Israel-Hamas war. Today, Israeli officials confirmed IDF forces killed Hamas leader and October 7th architect Yahya Sinwar. The IDF says it killed 3 militants in an operation earlier today and used dental records and DNA evidence to confirm one of them was, in fact, Sinwar. Hamas has yet to confirm his death. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spoke earlier, urging Hamas to take down their weapons and to release the remaining hostages. He went on to say that releasing the hostages would bring the end of the war closer. We have team coverage of this breaking news. Ramy Inocencio is on the ground in Tel Aviv, where families and friends of hostages are holding a rally. Samantha Vinograd is here to provide analysis, but I want to start first with Elizabeth Palmer in London. So, Liz, when we're talking about the significance of this moment, if we were making a comparison, October 7th was Israel's 9/11, then Yahya Sinwar was Israel's Osama bin Laden. What can you tell us about the significance of his death?
Well, first of all, it's a great feather in Benjamin Netanyahu's cap. He can now claim to have killed Sinwar's predecessor in Iran, Ismail Haniyeh, also the head of Hezbollah, and now the head of Hamas in Gaza. What it's going to do to the Israeli operation in Gaza is not clear. Netanyahu seems to be signaling that maybe they turn a corner now and start to wind down the combat operations. Although when I was there just a few days ago, they were still saying there were many Hamas militants that they felt they could only eliminate with airstrikes. So we'll see about that. I think that the families of the hostages are going to be very worried because at least Sinwar was the man who could represent Hamas in Gaza, the organization that was holding the hostages. With him gone, it's not clear who Israel negotiates with, assuming that negotiations do take place. So we had our colleague in Gaza earlier on ask the spokesman for Hamas, what is this going to do? And he said, it's just going to confuse matters. If it's true, and Hamas in Gaza was not yet admitting that Sinwar had been killed, but he did say if it's true, then it muddies the water. We don't know how things are going to evolve from here.
And Liz, when we're discussing how this is a feather in Netanyahu's cap, obviously he has come under international criticism for how he has conducted this war, but he also was responsible for releasing Sinwar in a prisoner exchange several years prior. How is all of this factoring into his perceptions of what happens next and how the Israeli populace is perceiving his conduct in carrying out the next stages of this war?
He's between a rock and a hard place, really. He decided to release Sinwar in that very high-profile exchange for an Israeli soldier who had been held by Hamas in Gaza, Gilad Shalit. Sinwar by then had been in prison for 20 years. He speaks perfect Hebrew. He'd become a leader in the jail and honed his leadership skills. So clearly he was a very good politician and leader. And so in that sense, Netanyahu has got rid of a ferocious opponent. The problem now is that there's a lot of pressure for Netanyahu to negotiate the release of the hostages. Not clear who he's going to negotiate with, and also hardline Israelis are very reluctant to stop the military negotiation before Hamas is really hammered into the ground. So he's a wily politician. Some say he's a genius of a politician. It's going to be very interesting to see how he moves over the next week.
And Liz, as you say, it muddies the negotiations. Is there a sense from your sources that there is optimism, that overall that this news is being received in a positive way, or because of the implications of this, it's too early to tell?
I think it's too early to tell. You know, most of the hostages' families were hoping for negotiations because they knew that the longer the military operation went, the greater the chance that their loved ones would be killed in Israeli operations gone wrong, or and in the case of the 6 hostages who were found in August, apparently the Israelis were getting too close and Hamas executed them. So all military activity in Gaza is, by definition, dangerous to the hostages. But as I said a little earlier, they want negotiations, and those really don't look any more probable tonight than they did a few days ago. But I know that my colleague Ramy is with some of the hostage families and supporters tonight. Maybe he'll have some very up-to-date information on that.
That's exactly where we're going to go now, Liz. Thank you, Liz Palmer.
Pleasure.
I want to bring in CBS News foreign correspondent Ramy Inocencio. He is there in Tel Aviv. As we mentioned, he's at a rally being held by family and friends of the remaining hostages. So, Ramy, what is, first of all, just the reaction on the ground in Israel?
Lana, I'm standing outside the defense ministry here, and you can listen to the words "achshav, achshav." That says "now, now" in Hebrew, and this is something that, as you've been watching our coverage over the past year, is the incessant protest against the government to try to get the hostages home. And if you thought that anyone here would be celebrating the death of Sinwar, the people here that I've spoken to have said, no, this is not a time for celebration. If anything, this is a time for even more frustration and even more fear. As Liz Palmer was just saying, they don't know now what's going to happen to the hostages in Gaza. There is the hope, perhaps, that some Hamas militants might say, we will now give up our hostages and let them go back to Israel if there is a deal done. Some other people told me that there's a fear that maybe Hamas might make the decision just to kill the hostages now that Yahya Sinwar himself has been taken out. Fact of the matter is that no one knows, but the feeling here is that there is a turning point with the assassination, with the killing of Yahya Sinwar, and that's why this protest rally is happening in order to put even more pressure, as much pressure as they can, to try to get the government of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to come to some kind of deal with, I suppose, the remnants of any leadership that exists in Gaza to get the final hostages home.
And Ramy, along those lines, there was a belief that Sinwar was using some of the hostages as human shields and that they were around him. There were no hostages found in this operation. And as you said, there's fear among those families that you're talking to that Hamas may now kill any remaining hostages. Give our audience a sense of understanding about how many hostages are still believed to be there, the number that we have, and the last time we had actually an exchange where any of those hostages were released or were rescued by IDF forces.
Sure. Well, even before that, the fear here is that every day that goes by, there is the rising possibility that another hostage or hostages will die. At last estimated count, it's believed that about 100 hostages, dead and alive, still are in Gaza, and that perhaps maybe only a third of them might be alive. That's based on recent ceasefire negotiations that stretch back through the summer. But the fact of the matter is that no one knows except the Hamas militants themselves on the ground. Looking ahead, there's again the hope here that what they're doing right now today will hopefully pressure the government to try to cut some kind of deal with the remnants of Hamas in Gaza. There had been some movement, actually, internationally. The foreign minister of Iran did touch down in Egypt for what people were thinking was perhaps the start of some kind of new ceasefire talks. We don't know how the assassination of Sinwar will affect that. But the fact here is that internationally people really don't care as long as they say to bring the hostages home.
Yeah, when they're thinking about their loved ones, that is their top priority. All right, thank you, Ramy, there in Tel Aviv. I want to bring in now CBS News intelligence and national security reporter Olivia Gazis. You're there at the State Department. Olivia, talk to us a little bit more about what you're hearing from the intelligence community on Sinwar's death. In particular, the fact that he wasn't specifically being targeted. In some ways, it was almost happenstance that he has now been announced to have been killed by IDF forces.
That's right, Lana. That's been the preliminary picture painted to us by Israeli and American sources thus far, that while there was intelligence indicating that Sinwar may have been in the area where IDF forces were operating, that there was not a sort of strategic intelligence, there was not a tactical intelligence indication that he was there. This was a chance encounter that IDF forces had, and it was only once they started looking at the targets they had taken down that they started to recognize somebody who looked physically like Yahya Sinwar, and there ensued the DNA and dental record checks that have since confirmed that he had been killed. Here at the State Department, officials have been on high alert since this morning. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is actually on the plane with President Biden heading overseas to Germany. We're expecting a briefing from the State Department spokesperson in the next series of minutes, where I'm sure questions will be raised about what this means for the future of the conflict in Gaza. As you were talking with Ramy and Liz about what the main question here is who Hamas identifies as the successor to Yahya Sinwar. There are a couple of names that are already floating out there. There is going to be a process for this group to identify, just as had been the case after the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, who was the political leader of Hamas, who had been dealing in the negotiations for the bulk of their duration. Now the group is going to have to identify somebody to speak for them. Yahya Sinwar was obviously on the military side of the group and sort of assumed power of both. Now that he is gone, there are questions as to whether his brother, who we know operates in Gaza, may take the helm, or whether there will be a more politically oriented leader who is based in Qatar, who will assume the mantle instead. That will determine whether there is a deal to be struck or whether this group intends to dig in. And as we have been noting, sort of buckling down, potentially taking a toll on hostages that we know are still being held by Hamas, along with other militant groups in Gaza.
Olivia, that's such an important point, because after Haniyeh was killed, there were some concerns about the ability of Israel to be able to negotiate for those hostages, and particularly when Sinwar took up the mantle, given that he was the architect of the operation and had killed more Jews than anyone else since the Holocaust. There was a lot of concern about Sinwar. It's not an exaggeration, I think, to say that he was target number one. What have the efforts looked like for the IDF to try and locate him?
Sure. And to that point, Lana, I mean, a lot of the diplomatic effort that had been in full force in, let's say, the first half of the year, officials had noted had really slowed down and ground to a halt as of August. You'll recall that U.S. officials in particular were saying that they were within the 10-yard line of sealing a deal that would pave the way for a ceasefire and the hostage exchange.
I'm sorry.
Saying that that proposal was
Sorry,
within reach. And
I'm just going to interrupt you right now, because I'm told that Vice President Harris is speaking on this very topic, so we're going to head over there.
The world are better off as a result. Sinwar was responsible for the killing of thousands of innocent people, including the victims of October 7 and hostages killed in Gaza. He had American blood on his hands. Today, I can only hope that the families of the victims of Hamas feel a sense and measure of relief. Sinwar was the mastermind of October 7, the deadliest day for the Jewish people since the Holocaust. A terrorist attack that killed 1,200 innocent people and included horrific sexual violence and more than 250 hostages taken into Gaza, including 7 Americans, living and deceased, who remain in captivity. A terrorist attack that triggered a devastating war in Gaza, a war that has led to unconscionable suffering of many innocent Palestinians and greater instability throughout the Middle East. In the past year, American special operations and intelligence personnel have worked closely with their Israeli counterparts to locate and track Sinwar and other Hamas leaders, and I commend their work. And I will say, to any terrorist who kills Americans, threatens the American people, or threatens our troops or our interests, know this: we will always bring you to justice. Israel has a right to defend itself, and the threat Hamas poses to Israel must be eliminated. Today, there is clear progress toward that goal. Hamas is decimated, and its leadership is eliminated. This moment gives us an opportunity to finally end the war in Gaza. And it must end such that Israel is secure, the hostages are released, the suffering in Gaza ends, and the Palestinian people can realize their right to dignity, security, freedom, and self-determination. And it is time for the day after to begin, without Hamas in power. We will not give up on these goals, and I will always work to create a future of peace, dignity, and security for all. I thank you all.
Is the U.S. asking Israel to end the war now?
All right, we just heard the Vice President speaking there. These are the first remarks that we're hearing really from the administration following the confirmation by Israel of the death of Yahya Sinwar, the architect of October 7th. She said that this is an opportunity to finally end the war in Gaza, talking about the necessity to both ensure Israel's security and self-determination for the Palestinian people. CBS News political director Fin Gomez joins me now. Fin, what can we make of these comments by the Vice President?
You know, I think that, in her comments here that we just heard on the death of Sinwar, I think, in speaking with Democrats close to her campaign, they do believe that one of her strengths is foreign policy, and they do believe that she can be presidential in this space. And I think what you saw today was an attempt to do that, and it's an attempt to do that emphatically. I mean, as you mentioned, her saying it gives an opportunity to finally end the war in Gaza, and also did also speak about the people in Gaza and how that they can have that self-determination to have a Gaza without Hamas in power. And also, I thought it was very notable that in her remarks just now, she said very, very emphatically again that this, that it is also a warning to any terrorist that kills Americans, threatens our troops or our interests. Know this: we will always bring you to justice. And I think if there's a memorable takeaway line, Lana, in these very poignant and tough remarks here, I think it would be that line there.
Yeah, and especially describing to her constituency, the American people, that Sinwar has American blood on his hands.
Right.
Obviously, these comments come in an important moment in the Israel-Gaza war, but it also comes as we are so close to the U.S. presidential election. Certainly, that moment looked presidential. I'm wondering if we've had any comments yet from the Trump campaign.
Not yet, but we do expect some. I did reach out to some senior advisors on the Trump campaign just before this segment with you, and usually, Lana, in the traditional sense of these presidential cycles, while something that, there are many voters who assess foreign policy, it's not typically on the top of the list of top issues, right? I think in this cycle specifically, it has been the foreign policy and the respective approaches to foreign policy that we're seeing between these two campaigns is something that is significant. significant. It's something that many Americans are considering, especially in comparison to previous cycles. And it's not just Gaza, which has been a huge political, has had a huge political imprint on the political landscape as well. Even early on, dividing the Democratic Party, you still see some division within that, within the party. But if you look at Ukraine, if you look, obviously the war that is currently happening, it is in the Middle East. I think with all of this combined, early on, Afghanistan, all of it combined has brought this issue to the top of the list, near the top of the list. And I think that is also in a cycle with many unprecedented sort of places that we have seen so far. I think this is also something that should be regarded as unique to this cycle.
All right. Fin Gomez, thank you.
Thank you, Lana.
We will have continuing coverage of this major development in the Israel-Hamas war just after a quick break. I'm Lana Zak. Stay with us. You're streaming CBS News 24/7.